The town of Hinton respectfully acknowledges that it is located on the First Peoples traditional lands. We recognize this traditional territory to show respect and understanding to those who walk this land since time immemorial. Today, we uphold our ongoing responsibility to work together in the spirit of the intent of the treaties with all the First Peoples and nations that call this place home. The town expresses gratitude for the opportunity to build a better community on these sacred lands for generations to come. And with that, we will call this regular council meeting for April 2nd, 2024 to order. Adoption of the agenda. Council, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda this evening? Seeing nothing from council's administration, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda this evening?
There is nothing from administration.
Thank you, CAO Panasiuk. And for those paying attention, item 6.2 is requiring a closed session. That is the closed session on our agenda listed as item 7, but that will be done concurrent with item 6.2 this evening. And with that, council. Councillor Race. Oh, sorry. Can you toggle again, please, Councillor Race? Oops. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move that we adopt the regular council agenda for April 2nd, 2024.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, the motion on the floor is that council adopt the agenda as presented. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councillors, please vote now. Sorry, Councillor Taylor voting in the affirmative by hand. That motion carries unanimously. Brings us to section 3 of our agenda, council minutes for adoption. Council? Councillor Chambers.
I'd like to move that make the motion that we adopt the regular council meeting minutes for March 19th, 2024 and committee of the whole meeting for March 26th, 2024 as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Council, the motion on the floor is that council adopt the minutes from the regular council meeting on March 19th, 2024 and the committee of the whole meeting minutes from March 26th, 2024. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councillors, please vote now. Councillor Taylor voting in the affirmative by hand, and that motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to section 4 of our agenda today, Citizens Minute with Council. Minute with Council provides an opportunity where residents can address council regarding issues, events, celebrations, or concerns. To ensure a constructive and welcoming environment, please adhere to the following guidelines. Keep your remarks concise, limited to 1 minute. Address the chair of the meeting when speaking to council. Avoid asking questions as this is not a Q&A session, and maintain a respectful tone and language. Administration, is there anyone on the list for Minute with Council this evening?
No, there's not.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience today who wishes to speak for Minute with Council? Seeing nothing, is there anyone online that wishes to speak for Minute with Council?
No one online.
Thank you, administration. That takes us to section 6 of our agenda this evening, action items. Item 6.1, amendment to Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee, bylaw number 1158. CAO Panasiuk.
Thank you, Mayor. I will turn this over to Ms. Juke.
Thank you, and through the chair to the rest of council. Good afternoon. This item is to propose amending the bylaw that establishes the Beaver Boardwalk Community Oversight Committee. The proposed amendments were first suggested by council at the 2023 organizational meeting and reviewed at the committee of the whole meeting on March 26, 2024. The 4 major changes to the bylaw are restated in the report that you have today. And in addition, an adjustment was requested by the committee on the 26th. That has also been made to section 5.5 in the draft amending bylaw attached to this report. You will see administration included a further clarification to distinguish between voting committee members and non-voting administrative and technical support that are often delegated to the committee by the CAO. And that's contained in a new section 4.5, itemizing those members separately. Administration is recommending all 3 readings of the bylaw tonight if council deems appropriate, And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Juke. Counselor Taylor.
What was the change that the committee recommended to 5.5? It didn't look different from the last time we talked about it. Was that changed since we talked about it, or was it before?
Ms. Juke.
Thank you. And through the chair to the rest of council. So the draft that the committee reviewed on the 26th had a discrepancy in that particular section.
Yeah.
Where it said, it still said 9 members, and committee required that to be changed to 7 to more accurately reflect the list. And so that's been done in this draft that you see tonight. So if you look at section 5.5, it talks about 7.
Yeah, okay. I thought you meant Beaver Boardwalk Committee. You meant our committee. That's fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor Taylor. Counselor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move that council give first reading to Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee bylaw number 1158-2. I think the changes are good. Anything that would make this committee more productive works for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Race. Council, the motion on the floor is that council give first reading to Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee bylaw number 1158 TAC 2. And for Counselor Ostashik, we are on item 6.1 of our agenda this evening. Council, any discussion? Seeing nothing, we will call the question that council gives first reading to Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee bylaw number 1158 TAC 2. Councilors, please vote now. Counselor Ostashik.
I'm in favor, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Ostashik. And that motion is carried unanimously. Counselor Taylor.
I move that council give second reading to Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee bylaw number 11582. No comments, thanks.
Thank you, Counselor Taylor. Council, the motion on the floor is that council give second reading to Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee bylaw number 1158 TAC 2. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councilors, please vote now. Councilor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in favor.
Thank you, Councilor Ostashik voting in the affirmative, and administration, please mark me as voting in the affirmative as well. And that motion is carried unanimously. Counselor Chambers.
I'd like to make a motion that council proceed to a third reading of bylaw 1158 TAC 2.
Thank you, Counselor Chambers. Council, the motion on the floor is that council proceed to third reading of bylaw number 1158 TAC 2. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councilors, please vote now. And Counselor Ostashik, you can vote by hand if you'd like in the favor. Counselor Ostashik by hand in the affirmative. And that motion is carried unanimously. Counselor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question for administration. So typically for, at that time, it would be, making a motion for a unanimous vote. And it's changed here.
CAO Panasic.
Through the mayor to members of council. So the vote to proceed to third reading must be unanimous, but you don't have to specify that council gives unanimous consent. That'll be reflected in the minutes under the recorded vote that we provide. So there shouldn't be any particular issues, but I do understand your point.
So is that how we'll see it moving on? This is how we will see it. If it comes to us again, and we need a unanimous.
Through the mayor to members of council, I think we'll typically our wording has been, I think since being here, that council agrees to unanimously proceed, and it's just more of a housekeeping item that people are able to see that there is a requirement for unanimous consent on those. So in the future, you'll see it that way. We just had forgotten to put it in there, but it's not needed. Just a housekeeping and a practice thing that we try to keep consistent.
Thank you.
Thank you, CO Panasic. Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move that council give third reading to the Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee bylaw number 1158-2. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, the motion on the floor is that council give third reading to Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee bylaw number 1158 TAC 2. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, councillors, please vote now. That motion is carried unanimously. Council, is there anything further for item 6.1 on the agenda this evening? Seeing nothing, we'll move to item 6.2 of the agenda, appointment to Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee. CAO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. If council would like, because we have passed the terms of reference as presented, we could make a motion to go in to go into closed session, have a discussion on the applicant, come back out and vote accordingly for the application for the Beaver Boardwalk Committee.
Thank you, CAO. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that council go into closed session.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, the motion on the floor is the council move into closed session at 4:12. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councillors, please vote now. And that motion is carried unanimously. For those of you in the audience today, we'll be in closed session for probably only a few minutes, and we'll be back for the remainder of the meeting. Thank you. CAO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor. Administration will recommend that council appoint Trevor Boutillier. My apologies for that name or the mispronunciation, to the Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee for a 2-year term.
Thank you, CAO Panasic. Counselor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make the motion that council appoint Trevor Boutillier to the Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee for a 2-year term.
Thank you, Counselor Magoon. Council, the motion on the floor is that council appoint Trevor Boutillier to the Beaver Boardwalk Oversight Committee for a 2-year term. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councilors, please vote now. And that motion is carried unanimously. Council, anything further for item 6.2 on the agenda? CAO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor. I have confirmed that this will make up the full complement of the Beaver Boardwalk Committee, so we will not be advertising any further.
Excellent. And I would like to thank Mr. Boutillier for his service. Moving on to item 6.3 on the agenda, Hinton Recreation Center Condition and Viability Assessment, CAO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor. I will turn this over to Ms. Weber and Mr. Rousseau.
Good afternoon, Ms. Weber and Mr. Rousseau. Please take the floor.
Thank you through CAO Panasic and through the chair to all of council. So this report is before you today. As you recall, February 24, council administration met and had a workshop regarding the next potential steps for the rec center and the aquatic facility. As a result of those discussions, administration brought a report back last week to the committee of the whole meeting, March 26, for a review of the following condition assessment and viability assessment. The details are contained in the report. The consensus reached at the committee of the whole was that committee seek consensus requesting us to bring back the rec center condition and viability assessment report to the April 2nd regular council meeting. We're here for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Councilor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I apologize, in looking through the report, can somebody identify if I did miss it or just let me know, what is the construction reserve currently at?
I think I would like to defer to Ms. Bourbeau, the Director of Corporate Services.
Ms. Bourbeau.
Thank you, members of council. Currently, at the end of December 2023, it's 1.2 million.
Thank you, Ms. Bourbeau. Councilor Chambers.
I'd like to make the motion that council direct administration to proceed with the Recreation Center Condition and Viability Assessment Report at a maximum cost of $200,000 to come from the Recreation Center Reserve. If I may speak to it.
Please.
Just based on our conversation, I know there's some maybe confusion or comments in the community around where that money is coming from, but I do believe that having a good understanding of our recreation facility, what is feasible and what's viable for us to do moving forward is a good place to start. And I do believe that the funds coming from that area does work with the intended use of what that reserve was for. So I support it as recommended.
Thank you, Councilor Chambers. Council, the motion on the floor is that council direct administration to proceed with the Recreation Center Condition and Viability Assessment Report at a maximum cost of $200,000 to come from the Recreation Center Reserve. Councilor Taylor.
Yeah, I make these comments because there's also some, I think, concern in the community that this is just another study and this isn't important. And I'd like to address that. We've done previous condition and viability assessments on the rec center. June 14th, 2014, a structural, and I mentioned this before, but apparently it didn't get out in the community too well. June 14th, 2014, structural and engineering assessments were given to council. And while there were no areas of general concern, the engineers involved did recommend redoing the assessments every 10 to 15 years. Now, I'm assuming they suggest that they do that because assessing a structure where thousands of members of the public enter every year is just a prudent safety step, and I agree with them. So this reassessment. This will not only inform council any work in the future, but even if we weren't doing any work in the future, it's an important safety thing that we should be doing to our buildings on a periodic basis, according to the engineers that were involved in this study. And with respect to the mechanical and engineering systems, Williams Engineering assessed the mechanical and engineering work in this and gave council a report, as all of this council, I believe, would know. Maybe not. June 12th, 2017. And that report indicated that those systems were in good shape. And my discussions with engineers involved in the project indicate that doing those type of reassessments every 5 to 10 years is prudent, presumably for similar reasons that I just listed. It's an important safety thing for any building that we do to look at the engineering and mechanical systems in the building. So we're not just doing this in order to prepare for the future. We're doing this because this is a prudent thing for any council to do. And finally, the one thing that my understanding is we're not completely redoing because it's not necessary would be all the geotechnical work. Because the earth doesn't change that much every 10 to 20 years. We're only going to be doing detailed geotechnical work if there is, foundational difficulties that exist. So I think this provides a little bit of context to the community and the community concerns that this is just another useless study. It's not. It's important in its own right to do this. And I think that any responsible council would periodically do such work just for the reasons of public safety alone. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you help me understand how does the proposed and recommended direction, how does it advance the community towards the construction of the rec center in terms of the long term?
Thank you for the question through to council. Part of the purpose of doing this assessment, both the condition and the viability assessment, is to determine, number one, the financial plan to address what the outcomes are going to be. Also to provide a funding model to move us forward as a community to establish what we need to do with the building that there is and any future building that we might want, as well as what that monetary impact is going to look like for residents. So those are some of the differences in what this scope of assessment will provide. And then, of course, the ability then to look out and seek grant options that will be informed by the scope. Did I answer the question, Councillor Magoon?
I think so. If the mayor will give me the latitude, or if you
Please, if you want to follow up.
Thank you. And so I guess my question is, looking at some of the discussions we had in the strat planning session not too long ago, the one thing that I'm having a little bit of difficulty with is why would we not look at the financial piece first? Because I guess this is my fear. Over the last decade, I think it's reasonable to say there have been a number of looks at the rec center issue, whether it be geotechnical reports or doing some high level design studies. And I think the longer that those plans and studies sort of sit on the shelf without a sound financial plan attached to it, I think there's a greater likelihood that they become less relevant or less accurate. So I guess the question I have is, why do we have the recommendation to proceed with this evaluation first, rather than dive deep into the financial side of things before that?
To the chair, to Councillor Magoon, that the purpose of doing this
study as well as the viability assessment is to understand whether the existing building in terms satisfies the code, the safety, all the regulatory requirements, knowing that we are able to put a financial plan together to say that the building is viable for the next 15 to 20 years. So it's therefore good to drop X amount of dollars into it. Or it may inform us to say that the building is only good for X years, and therefore we need to start preparing for a brand new building that will have financial expenditure of X in today's value. That will then confirm in terms of what the tax rate increase would be to the community over the ensuing years. And hence the reason to bring this forward now, to understand what are we working with right now? Is it still fit for purpose? Is it still meeting the next 5 to 10 year ideals of the community? And then from there we can say, okay, we're looking at X dollars to do X, and therefore it's going to cost you Y in terms of a tax increase potential.
Do you have further follow-up? I have a follow-up there as well. Is this financial plan that you're discussing here strictly related to the ongoing maintenance and operations of the existing facility? From your answer there, I took away that this financial plan is not with replacement in mind, or the financial plan for replacement is strictly looking at the financial plan for the existing structure and its ongoing costs. Is that correct?
Through the chair to my that would be correct. Yes, that 95% of this report, if it's undertaken, will inform what the current status and the future expenditure would be. Hence, the 5% that I said that it will include a future bill will advise us to say, is it worth sinking X amount of dollars over the next couple of years, where it's probably best to put it into a green field or an alternate purpose building.
Thank you. Councillor Race.
Mr. Mayor, so I have several questions. In February of 2019, 3 of us were at a committee of the whole meeting where a direction was made to put $250,000 a year in a recreation facility construction fund. So what I'm hearing today is you're calling it money coming from the Recreation Center Reserve. What's with that name change?
Thank you, Councillor Race, through the chair. I would like to defer the question to our Director of Corporate Services, so she can explain the name difference.
Ms. Bourbeau.
Thank you, Council. In 2019, the motion was made. I do not know. I did not look up to see who was in control of the GL. When the reserve was set up on the financial records, it was set up as a recreation center reserve. We provided the name of the reserve to the writers of the report before you. We were under the understanding it was for construction reserve, but those words are missing from the title in it. I looked in the financial statements from 2019 forward, and it's not noted there either as a construction reserve, but administration is very agreeable to adding that word to the upcoming financial statements. I'm uncertain if it will happen for 2023 because they are in draft format now. But moving forward, we certainly can. We have no reason to not. Now, in our mind, though, these costs would be part of upcoming construction. So we're missing the word in our general ledger and our descriptor, but in our minds, these are costs related to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I do have a follow-up, please.
Go ahead.
I think that word construction is very, very important. When I think back to that talk we had, 5 years ago about this construction reserve, it was for construction. When we have a direction, we know what we're going to do, whether we're going to build, whether we're going to do the best remodel ever. That's where this money is dedicated for. Construction of something. Another question I have is the 2018 assessment. Where did that money come from to do that assessment?
Ms. Bourbeau, any chance?
Sorry about that. I should have said that was coming.
I'm sorry if I may clarify for the assessment that was done in 2018. I could look that up if you prefer to just carry on, and I will try to get an answer for you before you're done.
Thank you, Ms. Bourbeau. Thank you,
My
Council.
Last question is, should the assessment that you would like to do right now, is that not something we should be doing, like just as, due diligence? We want to know about the rec center. It's a pretty big asset to us.
Ms. Weber?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Race, for the question through the chair. Yes, it would be to Councillor Taylor's point, is that these are assessments that we would want to maintain doing at regular intervals so that we have a really good idea what the asset is worth and how it's aging.
So in
Thank you,
saying
Ms.
everything
Weber.
that I just said, I cannot support this motion because that money is there for construction. When we are ready, we're ready to build, or we're ready, we know what we're doing, that's when we're going to utilize that money. Or that's what I thought the intent was.
Please maintain order in the audience, please.
So that's why I can't support the motion, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Magoon? There's a process there, Councillor Taylor. Magoon's in the queue.
I guess my question is philosophically, in terms of where the money is going to come from to fund that sort of study in relation to the rec center. If looking for consensus, if a councillor was not necessarily supportive of taking that money out of the construction reserve, but was looking for, and maybe this is more of a corporate services question, but was looking to identify that it comes out of either a different reserve or if it has to be budgeted into this year's general budgeting, is that an option, is to perhaps table this, to go find an alternative source, to come back and revisit this at a later time? Because I find myself very much in agreement with Councillor Race. I would like for myself to keep the construction reserve as whole as possible, because again, $1 million, it really is a drop in the bucket to the final overall cost of building any kind of upgrades to the facility out, or Lord forbid, a new facility. So I guess let's just start there with that question. I don't want to overcomplicate it.
CEO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor, to the rest of council. So my recommendation is, I do believe that this reserve account is still the appropriate one. It would not be common for municipalities to establish numerous reserve accounts and break down an individual project into reserve accounts for assessments, engineering, construction, at least not at this stage of the game. You would do that probably at the time of tendering or RFP. But at this stage of the game, my recommendation would be one reserve account would be sufficient for everything to come from that would be in support of a recreation center modernization. Regular maintenance does not come out of the reserve account. It is all in support of, moving towards something related to the recreation center. But at this point in time, if we wanted to create reserve accounts for the, breaking down the individual costs, we certainly can. I don't think it's necessary at this point in time. Typically for capital projects, you have one reserve account in support of moving towards it, and the money comes out of there and you fund it appropriately. I think it's, I think it may be a wording or a semantics issue, and possibly different understandings of why this was created in the first place. But moving forward, my recommendation would be to have one reserve account that would be specific to moving this item forward. That would include all costs.
Thank you, CAO.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Magoon?
Thanks. If I can just, for the clarity of administration and fellow councillors, the reason why I'm sort of landing in this area for myself is, we've identified that not only is this study important to looking at, what the long-term viability of the facility is. I think we have, and I think Councillor Race touched on this, we have a responsibility to do that anyway. We don't want to find ourselves in the position of, I think it was, forgive me if I'm wrong, I think it was Drayton Valley or one of the neighboring communities had suffered some catastrophic failures in the roofs of their arenas about a decade ago. Because, you know, there had been some issues with long-term monitoring of the facility. I think it's just, you know, something we have to do is to make sure we know what the state of our facilities are, which is why in my head, I understand the CAO's response and I respect it, but I think it's just something that, you know, that we're behooved to sort of do anyways, to keep an eye on what the facility looks like. And I think that's why I want to sort of keep them separate. I'm supportive of doing this sort of study. I don't have a lot of time for people who are trying to, you know, turn studies into political footballs. That's not important. The thing is, you have to know what your assets are looking like and, you know, what their current shape of, you know, how strong they are and what their lifespans are. But I would like to keep where that money comes from separate for myself. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be speaking in favor of the proposed motion. I'm speaking in favor of it because when this was discussed previously, there was an appetite of council to move this project forward expeditiously. The only way to do that is to draw the money that's required for this study from a reserve. It wasn't part of the budget to draw it from taxation. This is a required part of moving forward towards construction. This analysis gives the information that's needed for a high-level design, high-level overview, and then that feeds into the detailed design, which will feed into the construction documents. If council wants to move ahead with this quickly, it's either take it out of the construction reserve, or we have to make a motion to take it out of a different reserve. We're going to take it out of a different reserve. As CAO Panasic said, that's just a game of semantics that we're doing to appease the public. It really doesn't do anything to change the amount of money that's available. If we don't want to do that, then we're back to putting the recreation center construction project back to the back burner, and it can be considered in 2025 during the budget and collect the money through taxation. But then that means it delays everything until the 2025 budget is passed. So I'm speaking in favor of this, approving it today and taking the money out of the recreation center construction reserve, because it's the only way that I see currently available to us so we can expeditiously move forward. And that's what I want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I'm also in favor of this motion. I'm also in favor of taking it out of this reserve. I see this condition and viability assessment, like I said, not just some useless study, but a vital step in moving forward with this project. It's as vital as any engineering work you would do. The fact that we're going to have little reserves for all these different things makes absolutely no sense. And to do that for an item that's going to make up max 1/200th of the cost of what this is, what we can afford. I mean, 4 million, 40 million is the max we can afford. That's 1/200th. That's 0.05%. We're going to have little reserve accounts for that small amount of money. That's absolutely ridiculous. No, that's what you have these reserves for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, any further discussion? Well, Councillor Magoon.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Clarify two things that I think are relevant to the topic, more for the public than anything else. The first is that number one, I think it's important that we find the most direct path to updating and improving our recreation facility. I think everybody's pretty much moving in that direction, and I appreciate administration bringing that forward. I think what the public has to understand, and we saw it through the strategic planning session, and thanks administration for bringing us forward some of the high level numbers. And forgive me for my use of the following words. There's a terrifying financial burden that goes along with these sorts of improvements that people have to be very aware of. It doesn't mean that we're not going to do it or find ways to fund it through granting or other levels of governments or municipal partners. But it is pricey, and it is something to absolutely be aware of. So it's, again, doesn't change the fact that I want it as much as anyone else, but you really have to be aware of the cost of these things as you're moving into them. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So how long would this assessment take? We were to move it ahead, give you the money, how long?
Ms. Weber.
To the chair, to Councillor Reyes, this is at least a 6 month study. We're aiming to have the 2025 budget to be informed through this report. Now, we may not have the final report on our desk, but we'll have enough information to inform the 2025 budget in terms of the next steps going forward. So the sooner we get going, the sooner we can get the RFP out and give enough time for the RFP so we can have a representative response from qualified individuals or firms. And then we can get cracking on this. There's a host of information that needs to be looked at. Past studies will be dusted off. Well, site visits will be undertaken. And then, of course, interviews will happen with the folks that works at the center, and then we'll assemble it and bring it back to council as a draft report and then endorse it from there.
So you know what, my issue is, I think back to other studies that we've had, monies that we have spent, and the study sits on a shelf. We do not take the recommendations. We do nothing with the report, but we spent the money. And I guess you know what, it's council who controls this. Hey, it's gonna be council who says, this is what we're gonna do. So I'm torn. I really am, because, you know, we were having really, really big talks on this in, just prior to COVID. Then COVID hit and we stopped talking. And money had been spent. So I just need assurances that we're gonna move ahead. We're gonna do something, not just spend money and talk. And I hate to put you in this position, but thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one more thing I'd like to say to the public is, in my extensive experience with grant applications, renovations to existing large facilities, both provincial, federal grants, all different types of green energy grants, all the things that are out there. One of the first questions that they're going to ask you in that application is if you've done a building condition assessment. And if you haven't, that is a big red X on the report. And yes, this report will definitely, if the viability says it's not viable to put any money into the rec center as it sits right now, if nothing else, we're going to have a really good maintenance plan. We're going to know the life cycle replacement of a lot of different pieces. We're going to know some of the pieces that are most likely to fail. This is not a study to get somebody's opinion on what the town of Hinton should do. This is a building condition assessment that can be used for multiple things, for future years of budgeting, for all levels of maintenance, other granting things. We know that there's money out in the new provincial budget, and we need to poise ourselves in a position that we're going to be able to move forward and say, hey, we jumped ahead of this. We have this study done. And if that says we need a geotechnical report done, if it says we need environmental report done, we need those next pieces, that's what's going to inform the accurate spending of the next things that we need, so that we're in a position that we can accurately move ahead to say, you know, what are these pieces? Do we have to go greenfield? What does this look like? So I think it's not the study that people think in their minds, but it is an absolutely necessary, and I would say almost mandatory piece of 90% of the grant applications that I've done. And I think it's wise to take it out of, again, as I said before I made the motion, out of that reserve, because it is a necessary piece for construction. And I don't believe construction can go on without doing this work first.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to take an opportunity quickly just to address Councillor Race's concerns from my perspective. I think it's important to remember that some of this work that was done in the past wound up getting put on a shelf and not driven forward because of circumstances. COVID was a big thing, but it's also related to political will and public pressure. So for anybody that thinks this is important, that want to see this move forward, whether they're on council or whether they're in the public watching today or sitting at home listening, if this is important to you, every time the next step comes in the process, if you're a current councillor, if you're going to be a councillor in the future, it's important to say, we went through this step. It's time to move on to the next step and continue to drive the process forward. And for the public to talk to your council representatives and say, we want to see this move forward. We want you to make a decision and move forward with the next step. Currently, this is the next step. And that's why I'm ready to make this decision and move this forward today, so that down the road, when the next step comes, this council or a future council can take the next step and continue to move towards construction of the rec center. This is the first step. I want to take it today and I want to make sure the process continues forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Councillor Taylor.
The hypothesis has just been put out there that nothing has been done on the past condition assessment reports. That was the hypothesis that was put out. And I don't believe that. The past condition assessment reports had recommendations of up to hundreds of thousands of dollars for things that had to be done in mechanical, the electrical, and the structural engineering work on the arenas, the library, and the rec center. Did the town follow up on those recommendations? I gotta believe they would have.
Through to the chair to Councillor Taylor, I believe that the town has followed up on that. I personally, when I came on board, one of the things was the mechanical systems that we looked at during COVID. We secured 2 boilers, was installed during that time. We optimized the system. The infrastructure team under the facilities management has done numerous shutdowns, during which time certain things were upgraded. Did we follow through on 100% of what the report said? Likely not. But a lot of that was taken serious. And just to go back to Councillor Race's point, if you go back to the last item review of possible functional obsolescence, there's technological changes that have happened. There are enhancements that we can do. There's program initiatives that we could look at, reconfiguration of the floor space in conjunction with the staff that works there. There are lots of options that we can look at optimizing things. When we wrote this report, my colleague Debbie Weber and myself, we looked at this being a functional, implementable report that council could use, not just for 5 years beyond, but at least 5 to 10 years, and to inform whether we can have this rec center here for the next X years. If not, then we have to make some decisions through granting, through funding, through our partners to get a greenfield build going forward. At least there's a plan in place. So from a professional standpoint, I don't see this upcoming report, if this is approved today, being a report that will sit on the shelf and not be implementable.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Councillor Taylor, follow up.
Yeah, so the past condition assessment reports were followed up on. There's no reason to believe that the future condition assessment report won't be followed up on if it's got reasonable recommendations on how to fix or improve the buildings, regardless of whether or not we proceed with any work in the rec center, correct?
Mr. Russo.
I would concur.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question I have next revolves around timelines. So you'd mentioned that ideally the report may take upwards of 6 months. So working backward from end of year, that puts us into July. It's currently the start of April. So really that's like April, May, June, 3 months. Do you feel like that's long enough to be able to go out and get some competitive applications for this project?
Mr. Russo.
Through to the chair to Councillor Magoon. It's never long enough because, as you could see, the range of scope is between 75 to 200. Not that we're aiming for 200,000, but we want to ensure that the response we get from the RFP respondents is hitting all the key points. So we want to make sure that the scope is built to that extent that we get back. So back to a timeline, all of that puts things on a timeline. And the reason I said 6 months, 6 to 7 months probably is a better frame, is that we want to make sure by the time we get to budget 2025 conversations on capital expenditure, that we have at least an amount of money that we have an idea what this is going to be. Will we have the final report in hand? Likely not. I see that as a January, mid-February. But we wanted to make sure that we have enough information that can inform a budget decision to carry a line item of X dollars that we could, in the early part of January 2025, make that adjustment if necessary. But at least we have a line item and we had a business case that came forward to council for 2025 budget discussion.
May I follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
And I guess really building off Councillor Chambers' comments, is it reasonable to say that the previous condition assessment that was done approximately 10 years ago, that it is too outdated to essentially work with the grant application processes that we'll be looking forward to at this point in time?
Mr. Russo.
Through to the chair to Councillor Magoon again. I would say yes, based on the timelines that was created and based on the performance of the building and changes over time, just to take a geotechnical aspect, what happens to a foundation? Did it further get compromised? Or did we do any intervention at the time? Those are things that the grantor would say, I think you need to update this report. And so back to Councillor Chambers's point, it's a very relevant one that this is not money that would be spent unnecessary, but it would inform a process of putting us in a strong position for any potential future grants related to the rec center.
Just wondering if there's anybody else.
Go ahead, Councillor Magoon.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So given that, I think what I'll be speaking of in terms of this motion that's on the floor, I'll be supporting it only because I'm doing the math, looking around the room and listening to what people are saying in terms of whether or not they support the project. I'm not going to play the politically expedient game of trying to appeal to certain people because at the end of the day, the important thing is moving this particular condition assessment forward so that we can apply for the right grants. That's how we get the money. If we don't do that, then we're not getting grants and you don't have a rec center because we can't afford a project anywhere in the range of $40 to $70 million. That's just not going to happen. So again, I'm not here to do the populist thing. I see that most of council, it appears, is happy with utilizing this fund. It's not the fund I would choose. I would much rather find the money coming from a different fund. But again, listening to council, this is about the will of council. And in terms of trying to move a project forward, that's for the best, the good of the community. We want to update the rec center. This is what has to happen next. Full stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mayor. Just through the chair to Councillor Magoon's point, I did have some meetings recently on different grant applications, and the information I was getting, depending on every grant stream, has different requirements as far as building condition assessments. But the streams that I've investigated for other projects recently were requiring it to be done either within a 3-year or 5-year term, and anything older than 5 years, they were asking for updated documents or new things. So again, every thing is going to be different, but that's what I've heard within the last few months from provincial and federal grants that I've been looking at.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question is, would this assessment give us guidance as to whether we can do a really good reno or we have to do a new build because of our findings?
Mr. Rousseau.
To the chair to Councillor Rice, the short answer is yes. It will give you sufficient information to make an informed decision in terms of where best to spend future capital dollars.
And you know, another thing, I'm looking here, we're down one councillor. We have 6 people here. A tie vote is a defeated vote. A defeated vote is a delay in the process in getting stuff done. So this is very important, right? As they all are. Okay, and we're making this a top priority. This rec center.
That's correct, Councillor Rice. We just to add to it through the chair to Councillor Rice, on February 24th, that was Saturday, we had the strategic session. Out of that came, don't focus on what we're building, but focus on how we're going to fund it. And today we had a discussion last week, so it shows the expeditious manner in which we want to get this RFP off the ground so we can come back with the right information to council and the community.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Thank you, Mr. Rousseau. Seeing nothing further from council, I'm going to speak to this briefly. Coming in to this process new has given me an opportunity to read a lot of documents, and I can tell you that this recreation center has been on the docket since 2007. And in our strategic planning session, it came up that had council in 2007 chose to put away money instead of anything else that they did, we would today be building a recreation center. Council chose to do other things and the money doesn't exist. I look at a report from 2018 on our recreation center, and on page 3 says develop a funding plan. We have yet to develop a funding plan. I argue that this is not step 1 of the process for our recreation center redevelopment. Step 1 is to develop a funding plan. Without that, we're not moving forward. Mr. Rousseau, Are we at a state where in 3 to 5 years, we could utilize the upcoming condition assessment to get grants and build a recreation center, given our current financial plan?
Short answer is no, sir. We will not be able to afford a new recreation center in 3 to 5 years' time.
Thank you, Mr. Rousseau. So the argument that we need this assessment to apply for grants is moot. We need a financial plan. In 2019, council decided to start putting money away in a reserve fund to build a recreation center. Today, we're discussing taking that money and utilizing it for maintenance and ongoing operations of the recreation center. I would like council to consider that. Number 3, step number 1, develop a funding plan. Councillor Magoon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think the mayor brings up a good point. So before I finalize my decision and vote on this, I need to go back to this. One of the very first comments I made during this discussion was the fact that we don't have the finances in order to build this rec center. Councillor Chambers brought up that these plans are really, they have a shelf life good for the grant process of 3 to 5 years. So if we're not looking at having the finances in order in the next 3 to 5 years, again, I come back to my original question of, is this something we need to be doing first? Or, you know what I mean? Like, my fear is that this is something we're saying, yeah, it's going to help feed our finances, but we're not going to be in the position of actually arranging the finances so that we can make any kind of major effect on this. That's the thing. I don't want to pay for this, for it not to have a positive impact to move this forward. So before I finalize things, I want to explore the mayor's comments.
Councillor Chambers.
So through the mayor, my understanding though is that there's the two pieces. There's the recreation center condition and viability assessment. And the viability is the information that is going to give us to say, are we looking at greenfield or are we looking at a renovation? And I don't know how we can build a financial case if we don't know if we're renovating or building from scratch. And the other piece, when I talk about that 3 to 5 year, we know there's money out there for recreation center upgrades in general. And that money, this report will fund, even if we decided that, yes, we're going to build up, renovate the existing building, or we're going to do greenfield, whatever that looks like. There will still, in my opinion, be grants that will come up within that timeframe that will enhance the existing facility as it sits, which this report would still provide that information for. So I think we need the viability piece to say, is this greenfield or is this a renovation? And the condition assessment, will we potentially have to do another one down the road in 10 years, 5 years, whatever that looks like, for the true blue hard construction costs? Yeah, I think that's a reasonable expectation for sure. But in the meantime, I think that there is potentially still some grants that could be accessed with this condition assessment that could help move the needle of, potentially bringing down some of those costs even in the short term with the facility that we're currently operating.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. CEO Panasic.
Thank you, Mayor, to the rest of council. So based on our conversation that we've had with administration, part of the reason that we're recommending a condition assessment first, financial plan second, is just to provide some parameters around that financial discussion. Otherwise, I think we'd be making a decision which would equate to picking a number out of the air and aiming at it. So, with recreation centers, the amount of variety that we've seen throughout the province is huge. And, learning whether, a renovation or a complementary asset to our recreation center is even possible versus a greenfield build, we're talking about varieties in the hundreds of millions, right? We're looking at 130 to 30 million. We really don't know what we could put in. So with that much ambiguity when it comes to this project, we don't want to start having a financial discussion before we put some parameters. And, and it will not be perfect because we're not going to be designing a recreation center, at least going to, a detailed design. It could be a concept prior to the financial plan. But this is just going to give us a better understanding about what we have today and what the options could be. And that'll drastically change the amount of dollars that we're going to be talking about. And, as an extreme example, if a consultant comes in and tells us that this is only going to last 25 years, for example, we need to take a close look on whether how much money we want to put into this existing asset versus building new. But that's going to drastically change, I think, the conversation. And we want to make sure that council can have that from an informed discussion, because we're going to have to aim at a financial plan at some point, and we want to make sure that we're as correct as we can be at these early stages.
Thank you, CAO. Councillor Taylor.
I think taking a financial recommendation from a report that was taken a number of years ago, you want to put it into context with time, place, and current financial status. When I got involved in recreation center discussions, we were talking $70 million facilities. We're not talking those kind of facilities. We can't afford that. We've got water, waste treatment. Times have changed. You can't take a recommendation from Lawn Pass without considering that. We're max 40 million, maybe $35 million. That means that we need to know the assessed condition of that thing as one of the first steps. You don't need to know the assessed condition of something when you can go up to $70 million. You can build anything you want. We can't. We got to work with what we've got. The other point I would like to make is I don't want to speak to councillor recommendations on how long they think assessments can last, because I don't know the professional qualifications of those councillors, but I do know the professional qualifications of the people that have done these assessment conditions in the past. And the ones that have done the assessment conditions in the past have been certified professional engineers. And the last assessment condition, expected life, I'm reading from it, expected life expectancy of the facility, 15 years plus, recommended reassessing every 10 to 15 years. So these things last and are good for more than 3 to 5 years. The construction assessment's good for 10 to 15 years. And I've been told by engineers that the mechanical and electrical assessments are good for 5 to 10 years. Do you have different information that refutes that?
Mr. Rousseau.
Through to the chair, to Councillor Taylor, as a professional myself, I don't refute that. I think that is exactly on the button in terms of what they've advised and what you've outlined in those reports.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think the question, I'll address it to administration and see who wants to tackle it. The CAO had discussed really the concept of trying to have accurate targets when it comes to developing financial considerations and planning. But I guess my question is, we really do have a bit of a range. And I think it's pretty impossible to nail down what the final costs of construction are really going to be over the long term. Cost overruns all the specifics of building out a large scale project. Why could we not start the process of financial planning in tandem, at least with this, to say, you know what, we understand that if we're going to affect any kind of major changes at the rec center, we are going to need some granting options. Based on the last set of reports that we had a range of potential costs. Is it not possible to start the financial planning process and then adjust our targets as we get more detailed information as it relates to the assessment, the condition assessment, those sorts of things?
CAO Panasic.
Through the mayor to members of council, it certainly can be. We know, the one thing we know for a fact is that what we're currently putting away at $250,000 a year is not going to get us the place we want to be. So at a very high level, what we do know today is we don't have enough money, and we don't have, and that's not going to get us there in any reasonable amount of time. So we will need to take a specific look at it. So, to Councillor Magoon's point, you absolutely can, right? And as you receive better information, you can refine targets. My only concern, maybe as an administrator, would be those fluctuating too drastically. But we do know that if the community does want a recreation center, really taxes are going to have to go in one direction. So not to say you can't start that process, but from my perspective at this time, there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot that we would have to, understand before we could be, go forward a little bit more accurately. But you're absolutely right. We do know that we have to make those steps at some point in time.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I then may speak to it. Yeah, I believe I'm still going to be supporting the direction that's on the floor. But that being said, I think it really is important for council, whether it's tonight or whether it's in the next upcoming weeks. I think we need to put forward a direction and motion to administration to begin the financial planning process. If the community is really going to be dedicated to updating and upgrading the rec center, you can't just say, well, in theory, we do this and then not worry about the financing. That's the equivalent of me walking into the RV shop and saying, well, I'm going to buy a new rig, but I really have no idea how much money I can afford. And the reality is my wife is not going to let me do that, right? You have to know what the impact to the budget's going to be over the long term, what the taxation impact is going to be. There's a financial reality that I think the community needs to be very clearly and transparently informed of. And I don't think it does us any good to worry about that later. I think we need to start worrying about that now. I'll support this tonight, but I think council really needs to look forward to moving a financial plan forward now, not later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I want to say a good counselor comes into a meeting open-minded. They listen to their fellow counselors, they listen to administration, and they weigh everything. This is a really important vote tonight. I moved to this town 42 years ago, and we didn't have a rec center. We had an outdoor pool, a pool across from the rec center. Beautiful little pool. Then we built the rec center. And thinking back, and I hate to say this, if we would have put aside $1 million a year, boy, think of the rec center we'd have today. Hey, a beauty. So I might lose my number one fan on the audience, but in hearing what council has said, in hearing what admin has said, that this is a top priority, that this assessment is going to give us guidance as to we're building a new or we're doing the best reno ever. It gives us guidance in what direction we need to go. I will support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Council, any further discussion? Seeing nothing, we will call the question that council direct administration to proceed with the Recreation Center Condition and Viability Assessment Report at a maximum cost of $200,000 to come from the Recreation Center Reserve. Councillors, please vote now. Councillor Race voting in the affirmative by hand. And that motion is carried 5-1 with Mayor Nissen voting against. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Davy Campbell, I just sent a direction to your email. If I could make that as a motion, please. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that council directs administration to bring back a preliminary financial plan discussion to a future committee of the whole meeting of council. And if I could just speak to that.
Councillor Magoon, before you do that, could you add some wording specifically about the recreation center topic?
Oh, sorry. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, Ms. Davy Campbell, if we can insert council directs administration to bring back a preliminary financial plan related to modernization and/or greenfield builds of the recreation center. And if I may speak to that, Mr. Mayor, then?
Yes, please.
I think the intention is really not to finalize anything so that it's ready for a regular council meeting, but we have to start having these discussions on what the financial planning impacts are going to look like. And I realize that, you know, we don't have a very specific number yet, but the CAO did indicate that that is a moving target that we can begin to narrow down as we go down this road a little bit further. And I think it makes a lot more sense to do this sort of thing in parallel with this process rather than after it. Otherwise, we're just delaying and we just keep pushing things back. So while we're getting a condition assessment, it does not hurt us to start the discussion on what our granting options are, who's going to be responsible for those granting options, who's going to reach out to our municipality partners like the county, provincial levels of government, federal levels of government. Again, it doesn't have to be deep, but I think we need to start having that conversation now rather than later. So that's why I'm asking for your support on this.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, the motion on the floor is that council directs administration to bring back a preliminary financial plan related to modernization and/or greenfield build of the recreation center discussion to a future committee of the whole meeting. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, question to administration then. I agree this is an important step in the process towards, hopefully construction at some point. Does it make sense to be undertaking this while the condition assessment is going on? Because I do have a concern. I'd be concerned about administration committing time towards, say, a potential greenfield construction when the condition assessment might come back to say, actually, the bones of it are very good and have a, you know, basically unlimited life continuation with reconstruction and renovation. I'd hate to see administration devote a bunch of time to exploring greenfield options if the condition assessment comes back to say it's not necessary, or potentially the vice versa. I'd hate to see them devoting a bunch of time to a financial plan for renovating the rec center if the condition assessment comes back to say, no, it's going to be complete failure within 10 years. So if administration could speak to that.
CAO Panasic.
Through the mayor to Councillor Stashik. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that is going to be a big risk. And when things are out on the horizon, they are going to be very blurry at this point in time. You know, so we can talk in generalities. We can, but to Councillor Magoon's point, we know the general direction that we will need to move, right? You know, whether it is a greenfield build or a minor or major recreation center renovation, we do know that we'll have to move in that direction. Now, how far do we want to go before we have a clear understanding about what our assets are today? You know, ultimately that will be up to council. We can move in that direction, but it's going to be, at this point in time, I don't know if we would drill down into the specifics of what it would look like or the design. I think we just, we would take a look at our understanding of moving in a direction. You can you can increase that over time or decrease it based on whatever decision council may end up making after this condition assessment. But the best we'll be able to do is talk in generalities, provide what others have done, what those costs are, and, facilitate a discussion with council to move in a direction, because we do know that $250,000 per year, as it currently sits, is not sufficient for really anything that we're going to be talking about or any meaningful project. So if we do want, we could look at, incremental decisions before we understand the conditions of our existing assets. We can do it, but like you said, it is hazy at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you, CAO Panasic. Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Taylor.
I don't mind a preliminary discussion, much like what we had in the strategic plan. We went over the preliminary numbers. But to go much more in detail for the reasons that Councillor Ostashik said, would I don't think, be prudent till we can understand whether we can work with what we've got. And for those counselors that undertook the field trip to Jasper to look at the Jasper Recreation Center, they did an assessment and they decided to spend 12 million. That turned out to be $20 million on the dressing rooms, the public viewing area, and the public entryway. They did not spend a significant portion of that money on the arena nor on the swimming pool area. So there's an example that all of council who took up an opportunity to go see that, and they did that presumably because the condition assessment showed that those facilities were, A-okay. That's the kind of thing that a condition assessment does for you. We saw that firsthand if you took advantage of that opportunity. And if you didn't, maybe you should go and arrange your own tour. Thank you.
Counselor Magoon.
Yeah, and just thank you, Mr. Mayor, just to reassure council, I think really the goal is to start the high. We're not going to finish that process of discussion about what financial planning for this project looks like. We just have to accept that, but it's a staged process. We haven't started any kind of meaningful communication with our municipal partners, or really bringing to our MLA or MP's attention that this is a goal that we really intend on pursuing. And I think having those initial conversations, we talked about them, or we talked about these types of conversations in the past as elevator conversations. We haven't even started that process. I think that's where we need to start as a council, is bring this to our attention of our partners so that we don't surprise them as we get through this condition assessment and this planning assessment for someone to say, oh, we didn't even know that you were looking at this. No, we talked to you about this and we would like your help securing funding because there's no way we can afford this on our own to affect any kind of meaningful change. We know that because of exactly the reason that Councillor Taylor just brought up. These things cost a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Magoon. Counselor Chambers.
Thank you, Mayor, through the chair. I think I struggle with the wording of this motion in the terminology financial plan, because we don't have enough information to come up with a financial plan, period. And I think we're so close to having a little glimmer of what that could look like that it could be, again, a bit of an exercise in futility. But I do agree that I don't know what the wording could be, but is it more of just a financial target? A financial plan, what that means to me is a ton of detailed work in that terminology. And maybe there's a way that we could have a broad financial target versus this whole financial plan, because we're just not there. We're not going to be able to get that financial plan without the information that we've just asked for. So as it's worded currently, I don't think I can support it because I don't think we have that. And it was clear in the previous agenda item that we would be getting information and using this information for our 2025 budget conversations, which I think is kind of what this is leading to. So I do think there's value in getting a preliminary number out there, a rough budget number, but calling it a financial plan as it is, I can't support that.
Thank you, Counselor Chambers. Counselor Magoon.
Well, I'd recommend that anybody's open to making an amendment. I'm not particularly hooked on financial plan. I think the important thing is that the public, our municipal partners, and our representatives at different levels of government understand what we're trying to undertake and what it's going to cost.
Thank you, Counselor Magoon. Seo Panasic, would you have any wording suggestions regarding the financial plan wording in this motion that would clarify it for your office? In the meantime, Counselor Taylor.
I agree with Counselor Chambers. Financial plan, I wouldn't support, but the wording of financial information, I probably would support. So I'd like to make an amendment that we change the word financial plan to financial information in the above motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Taylor. Seo Panasic, did you have something to add?
Through the mayor, the best I could come up with was financial discussion, but I think that Councillor Stewart has covered that adequately.
Thank you, Seo Panasic. So council, the motion on the floor is an amendment to the original motion, changing the word financial plan to financial information. And while that's coming up on the screen, any discussion on the amendment? Counselor Ostashik.
I guess I'd have to ask what council's thinking would form part of that financial information. Are we talking high-level construction costs? I'm not sure I'd need to know what kind of information we're looking for before I would think that this would be a good use of administrative time that I would support directing them to do.
Thank you, Counselor Ostashik. And before handing off to CEO Panasic, I'll just add in, from all of the things I've heard here, it sounds like there's a floor of roughly $30 million that we're going to need regardless of what we choose to do. But go ahead, CEO Panasic, do you have any insight on Counselor Ostashik's question?
Through the mayor to members of council, at least my interpretation, and I'm open to any further direction on this point, but my interpretation, at least to start, would likely be high-level capital costs, looking at, we have done some design work in the past. We have looked at different scopes, so we could bring forward those capital costs forward for discussion. We could also look at what other communities have done, even in and around us. We can outline maybe what those costs are and the requirements that would translate into the amount of money that we would have to raise as a municipality. I don't know what else we would bring at this point in time, but at least my interpretation is we would start there with high-level construction costs and bring it forward to committee of the whole for possibly further direction.
Sounds like good information for a public discussion from me, but Counselor Stashik, any follow-up?
No.
Thank you. Counselor Magoon?
Yeah, that's exactly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly what I'd be hoping for, is looking at that range of financial information that we have received. Mr. Mayor, you had mentioned, sort of the floor to the ceiling information that we have right now. And again, it's important for the public to understand that, having a look from the corporate services side of things, what does it look like to try and raise that amount of money through taxation? And, and if we don't do it just through taxation, then how do we approach it through fundraising by other means, whether we go for corporate donations, whether we go for municipal partnerships, other levels of government. And I think people are going to see very quickly that it's one thing to say, boy, we really want an improved rec center, but it's another thing entirely to answer the question, okay, how are you going to pay for it? I mean, that's the reality of it. Because again, I walked into our strat planning session going, yep, this has got to be our number one priority. And it still is. But you have to face the reality of what it's going to cost and then ask yourself, where's that money coming from? And again, it's just everything administration laid out. I think that's important. But this is really that transparency piece to get that conversation out to the public, because that hasn't happened yet. Right? What we've talked about is high level dollars. Okay, well, you said 30 million, but to Joe and Jane on the street, they might not think about what that means. Right? We really need to start having that discussion so people will understand, how is this going to impact me as a taxpayer? So, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Magoon. And Secretary, the amendment is financial plan to financial information. You have financial amendment written there. Thank you. And council, a reminder, the discussion is on the amendment that is on the floor that's changing the wording financial plan to financial information. Counselor Chambers.
Thank you, through the mayor. I just think when we're talking about this financial information, we need to make sure that we're really clear as well, that we're not setting up, if we're talking about a number, that's the floor number, that we're not saying we're going to be able to do this work for that amount of money. I like the wording change. I think it's a little more clear that it's not a full financial plan. I am in support of the changed wording, but I do think it's very important that we're communicating that if a number is decided as a result of this financial information we're receiving, that we will be that it is very preliminary, and the nature of it is to start conversations that this is not what we are expecting as a final bill, because it very likely that will change substantially. That's my only thought.
Thank you, Counselor Chambers. Council, any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question on the amendment that changes the wording in the original motion from financial plan to financial information. Councilors, please vote now. and the amendment is carried unanimously. The motion on the floor is that council directs administration to bring back a preliminary financial information related to modernization and or greenfield build of the recreation center discussion to a future committee of the whole meeting. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I appreciate council's discussion on this matter and some clarity on what we might see come forward out of this. And with that, I am going to support the motion. I wasn't going to originally, but I think now I am. I think there's some valuable learnings that can come both to council and to the public by undertaking this. I mean, for example, we could take a look at all the trials and tribulations that Edson has gone through since originally putting forth the plan to build a greenfield new recreation facility in Edson, and the costing of that and why they switched gears so drastically to move completely away from the greenfield construction and go back to renovating their existing facility. I think that kind of information would bring a lot of clarity both to council and to the public for some of the challenges regarding greenfield versus renovation, the costs, and with that, as some of the other councillors have said, what the tax implications are, what it's going to mean to the citizens in our community to support one or the other combination. I think that's an important conversation to have so that people are fully aware, or better aware at least, of what's going to happen to their taxes regarding how this moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Council, any further discussion? Councillor Taylor.
I support this, and I think you bring up a good point. This will start putting, at least in the public's mind, you know, what we have financially available, right? With all the things that we got to do, like water treatment plant, we got to save up for that. Waste treatment plant, you know, the $10-12 million we have to spend for that. So to start generally discussing that, I think will help temper expectations. And in regards to Councillor Ostashik's point, it'll help us get our head around maybe generally how much we'll have to come up with and what that means in terms of tax increases, because past public studies on this work have indicated that you know, only 30% of the public is okay with a tax increase of up to $200 a year, and less than 5% is okay with a tax increase of up to $500 per year. So that's the kind of numbers, and that's quite a while ago, but those are the kind of numbers that the last studies on how much the public is prepared to pay out of their tax dollars. And that's good to start getting those things out there. It makes a big difference when you have to pay taxes and you don't use the facility. Those are the people that we have to convince. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Council, the motion on the floor is that council directs administration to bring back a preliminary financial information related to modernization and or greenfield build of the recreation center discussion to a future committee of the whole meeting. Is there any further discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councillors, please vote now. And that motion is carried unanimously. Council, is there anything further for there we go, for item 6.3 on the agenda this evening? Seeing nothing, we'll move on. CAO Panassa, can you confirm that we have met all the requirements of items or section 7 on the agenda this evening?
Through the mayor, yes, we have.
Thank you, CAO Panassa. That brings us to section 8 of the agenda, correspondence. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the correspondence we got from the Minister of, was it the Minister of Red Tape Reduction? Or it was a minister about red tape reduction? Oh, yeah. Minister of Services, Alberta, and Red Tape Reduction. My concern with this letter is that he's given us we have a relatively innocuous, benign process to change a road right away. And it took a year and it slowed up business and business growth in this town. And now he's called it 3 months, and he's called that red tape reduction. Well, that's not red tape reduction to me. That's that is not an expedient business-like timeframe that's going to assist growth in this town. So I personally would like to send a follow-up letter suggesting to him that he may re-examine his timeframe and come up with one that's going to be more helpful to our businesses.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
So with that in mind, this is on the fly, but I'd like to make a motion that we send a follow-up letter on red tape reduction to Minister Nally and ask him to revisit his 3-month timeframe and ask him to make one that'll assist our business and business growth in a more timely fashion than 3 months. Three months is not red tape reduction. With regards to a reduced time frame for red tape reduction for the letter of March 26th, I guess. And I would suggest maybe we give the specifics of the case on how our business in our town was actually held up, and that this isn't just a technical exercise for us. This is an exercise in proceeding with business growth in a expeditious and business-like manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. And Councillor Taylor, before you go offline there, can you confirm that this is the direction that you're looking for, that council direct administration to send a follow-up letter to Minister Nally with regards to a reduced time frame of the letter received on March 26th, 2024?
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you through the mayor. I believe this is to administration. When we look at that situation, and the reasoning for sending our letter, I personally feel going from a year to 3 months is a good improvement. And I don't know, maybe I'm just used to dealing with government timelines. 3 months sounds like a cakewalk in some ways, but is there other things in the process that caused administrative burden other than just the timeline? Or was the red tape that we're talking about when we sent this letter surrounding just the timelines for approval and the rest of the application process and administrative work that was required? What does that look like? Because I think if we're going to revisit this back to a ministry, we need to revisit it with some specific, real clean specifics. Just to say we don't agree with your timeline, I don't know that I support that. Just as that being the only piece. But if we want to talk about why a 3-month impact would be detrimental to a business, if we want to talk about other administrative work, what was it within that year? Was there a lot of back and forth? Was there nobody that looked at it? Was it communication? You know, I think we need to be a lot more specific before we're going to be able to fire a letter back to the minister. So I don't know if anyone can comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. CEO Panasic.
Through the mayor to members of council, I don't see a lot of red tape within it. I think it was just specific to the timeline related to mostly the backlog. Without that backlog, it looks like the regular times that seem aggressive, and I don't know if I've seen it done that quickly, but in at a baseline at 6 months, 6 month moving down to 3, but there isn't a whole. The municipal process and what we go through is relatively benign. It's a bylaw that we bring forward to council. So there's usually, maybe a week or 2 delay there, creating that, bringing it forward, getting it approved by council with first reading. After that point in time, prior to second reading, it requires ministerial approvals for municipalities who are not cities. So that's the gist of it. I think it's just a matter of timelines. I didn't see anything else that caused us hardship. One of the things that, at least we've talked about, and I'll put it out as an idea for council to consider, was when it comes to road closures, providing that authority to do it, not just to cities, but for other municipalities who could apply for it or whatever the case may be, with certain parameters, of course, through our legislation. But if we could have that authority as a local government to make these decisions that fit our needs, and maybe simply notify Alberta Transportation and Economic Corridors, that would be significantly easier for us as administration and as a town. But that's just a suggestion, something we've talked a little bit about internally.
Thank you, CL. Councillor Chambers, any follow-up? Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
I agree with Councillor Chambers. I would add the details of our particular circumstance there. I could see a number of options. Town manager came up with one option. Other option might be they prioritize these things into things that aren't going to affect, somebody doing business and things that don't. I don't know. That to me, there's a thoughtful process that could go into this that won't take 3 months. That's what we're striving for. Is actually a better way to do things.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. And CAO Panasik, given that from Councillor Taylor, does this motion and direction as given give you the leeway to add those details as required should this go through?
Through the mayor, my suggestions would be to outline possible options within the motion. We don't have to specifically list them, but just to say regarding or for administration to send a letter on potential solutions or potential options for reducing the time frame. I think that would be a little bit more specific, because as of right now, the way I read it is just advocating to reduce the time frame from 3 months, and that's not acceptable. But just outlining some potential solutions, if we could amend it to say that, I think that'd be a little bit more clear.
Thank you, CAO Panasik. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I would support this if it was a little bit more detailed and a little bit more strategic. For CAO Panasik's suggestion, maybe. I really like the suggestion of maybe consideration towards municipalities being allowed to do their own road closures without provincial approval. In the event that it's not directly affecting a provincially owned transportation facility like a highway or something like that. I really don't understand why the province even has their fingers in there, but I find that is a problem amongst the entirety of the provincial legislative machine, is that there is way too much interdepartmental consultation and approval that's required, that each one of those interdepartmental approvals slows the process down. And it might look incremental if there's only one, but when there's 10, it slows it down immensely. And I would actually be pretty satisfied if they could get it down to 3 months and actually hit 3 months. But they say their target's 3 months. And in this instance, it was over a year. So I get we want to do something, but to do something to be able to expedite process with some suggestion, I could fully support. Just a letter saying 3 months is too long, I'm not sure I could. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you. I'd like to propose an amendment to the current motion. I'm going to take a stab at it, so you'll have to bear with me. So I would like to change it so that council direct administration to send a follow-up letter to Minister Nally explaining the impact of the current timeline on small business. Explaining the impact of the current and reduced timeline on a small business. So that way we would be able to see on both sides of the coin what the current timeline would mean versus an expedited timeline. And listing possible solutions, including allowing more municipal control in road closure issues. I'm open to some fine tuning. on small business. With regards to the current timeline. Maybe and proposed 3-month timeline. No, that one can stay. The current timeline and the proposed 3-month timeline. And possible solutions, including allowing more municipal control. In road closure issues, matters. Applications? I don't know. Applications might be appropriate.
Are you happy with that wording, Councillor Chambers?
I am.
Thank you. Okay, so council, the motion on the floor is an amendment to the original motion that will change its wording to that council direct administration to send a follow-up letter to Minister Nally explaining the current impact on small business with regards to the current timeline and the proposed 3-month timeline and possible solutions, including allowing more municipal control in road closure applications. Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I appreciate the amendment and the specificity around it. And I appreciate the CAO's comments of really trying to put more of these decisions into the hands of municipal government. It's funny, it seems like all the areas where we don't want the province to try and offload their responsibilities to us, it happens. And the ones where we actually could do some really quick, fast work that has a net positive effect on our local citizens are the ones they want to take advantage of. So in this case, this is one of those things a town could take care of quite easily. Are these road closure decisions related to our own community? Obviously not related to the highways. So I appreciate the amendment and the suggestions.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question regarding the impact to small business part. I just want to clarify, make sure that's just we just want to communicate our example of how in this particular instance it affected small business. We're not talking about implying that there should be any special consideration for business related applications, are we? I guess that would be to Councillor Chambers.
Councillor Chambers.
That's correct. It would be that we would be explaining in that current situation where we waited the full year, how that impacted the business, just so that they can understand, but certainly not the businesses would get special treatment. It would just be explaining this one situation and how it negatively impacted them in that instance.
Thank you for that clarification. I'll be supporting the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Thank you, Councillor Chambers. And CAO Panasic, can you just confirm that that meets with your understanding of this motion?
Through the mayor, yes, it does.
Thank you. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To administration, does the MGA influence the municipal control that we have regarding road closure in town?
CAO Panasic.
Through the mayor to members of council, yes, the road closure process is a process that's outlined through the Municipal Government Act, which does require ministerial approval. Just another piece of information that may be somewhat related, but council should be aware of is currently the process is the same when it comes to developed or undeveloped road allowances. So we have 2 cases in recent memory from the municipality where actually both were undeveloped road allowances, but it's the same process versus if it was an active road versus if it was a a treed lot with a historical road allowance that has been placed on it. So it's the same process. And, that's something else that council should keep in mind is, the two, we don't see, I don't see those being equivalent to the impacts to the community. One has never been used, but we are subject to the same process and even the same timelines. And both of those examples that we've been talking about, those were both on the underdeveloped side.
Thank you, CL. Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask for administration's input. I'm really not familiar with the road closure process. I'd like to ask administration, why does the province even have a say or want a say in how municipalities manage the road system outside of the provincial road network?
CL Panasic.
Through the mayor to members of council. So this, technically, we do not own the roads as a municipal government. Or as a municipal corporation, even the road network outside of the provincial highway or provincial highway network. Through our legislation, we are technically in care and control of those roads. So we're an operator of those roads. We have the responsibility of the roads, but we don't own it, and therefore we don't have the authority to discharge those roads. So that's as good as I can provide.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, CL Panasic. Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Chambers.
Through the mayor to administration. So when you speak of the historical treed lot road situation versus a closure of an existing used road, does the wording as it says, including possible solutions, allowing more municipal control, do you feel that that wording would allow you to address both of those as potential solutions along with other things, or would there be a wording change required?
CL Panasic.
Through the mayor to members of council, I think the wording would be sufficient. I just wanted to bring it up to council because I think it's an interesting point for consideration. In our letter, we can look at a number of different options. One might be addressing the two separately. I think that's something else we can include in there, but I think the wording would cover that and give us some flexibility as administration to put something together.
Thank you, CL Panasic. Councillor Chambers, anything further?
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So council, the motion on the floor is the amendment that will bring the original wording of the motion to that council direct administration to send a follow-up letter to Minister Nally explaining the current impact on small business with regards to the current timeline and the proposed 3-month timeline and possible solutions, including allowing more municipal control in road closure applications. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councillors, please vote now. And the amendment is carried unanimously. So council, the motion on the floor is now that council direct administration to send a follow-up letter to Minister Nally explaining the current impact on small business with regards to current timeline. I stop reading. And the proposed 3-month timeline and possible solutions, including allowing more municipal control in road closure applications. Council, is there any further discussion on this motion as it is amended? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councillors, please vote now. And that motion is carried unanimously. Council, is there anything further for section 8 or item 8.1 on our agenda, correspondence? Would council like to accept the correspondence for information by chance? Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that council accept letter from the Minister of Services, Alberta, and red tape reduction as information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, the motion on the floor is that council accept the correspondence for information. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councillors, please vote now. And that motion is carried unanimously. Council, anything further for correspondence? Seeing nothing, we'll move to section 9, notices of motion. CAO Panasik, any notices of motion this week? Thank you, administration. Moving on to section 10, reporting, council reports. Councilor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have nothing to report.
Thank you, Councilor Ostashik. Councilor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing to report.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. Councilor Chambers.
Thank you. I have nothing to report.
Thank you, Councilor Chambers. Councilor Race.
I do have something to report. I had the privilege as deputy mayor to attend the 2024 Canadian Biathlon Championships at the Nordic Center. Absolutely beautiful, that center. Couldn't have picked a better day. Excellent comments from anybody who I established eye contact with. I talked to them. They could not say enough good about our community. There were parents who were saying their kids wanted to move. It was super. Big thank you to Louis, to Tammy. Tammy kind of made me an expert on biathlon. We had over 230 athletes come to our town. Young people, fit people. Oh, to be young again, I would love it. We had 60 coaches. We had a lot of families. It was just amazing. And I can't say thank you enough to everybody who made that happen. To Gary, sitting there very quietly. He did a lot of good work on that. So thank you. And that's it, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Race. Councilor Taylor. Thank you, Councilor Taylor. And I have nothing to report this week as well. CAO Panasik, Chief Administrative Officer reporting.
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing to report.
Thank you, CAO. That will bring us to section 11 of our agenda this evening. Councilor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that council move into closed session.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. Council, the motion on the floor is that council move into closed session. Any discussion? Seeing nothing, we'll call the question. Councilors, please vote now. And that motion is carried unanimously. Those of you in the audience this evening, this is the end of our agenda. When we come out of closed session, the meeting will be complete. Thank you very much for attending this evening.